Hello everybody, it is good to be here today and giving a presentation on a brief history of M.I. Hummel Art, and I am going to also give a little bit of an overview and have us have a discussion, even though we're in a different format today, about what happens when an artist becomes a commercial success in his or her own lifetime. My name is Dean Genth, and many of you know me because I'm a docent here at the MacNider Art Museum. We have sat together in many lunch and learn sessions in former times, pre-COVID-19. And so this is a little bit of a different challenge for maybe all of us. I would much rather have you here in person and be able to see your faces as I'm taping this presentation for you to view at your leisure. So we'll get started, and I am thankful to the, also want to thank the MacNider staff for all their help in arranging this and putting this together for your benefit. I think it's part of the new COVID-19 world that we live in, and I know that I have made a lot of changes in my life, and I'm sure you all have too. And so it's just great that we have the technology, I think, to be able to reach one another. I don't know if a lot of you have been doing like I have, but I've been doing a lot of Zoom time meetings and sessions with kids and grandkids and other family members and friends that live at a distance. And so we're adjusting to this new world, and so today is no exception. So I hope you find this a good way to learn something new and have some takeaways. Again, my one regret might be that you're not here to ask the wonderful questions that I usually get toward the end of a presentation. But if you have any questions, those of you that know me are welcome to send me a message on Facebook Messenger, or if you have my telephone number, just give me a call and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have as a result of today's session. So let's get started. I don't know how many of you know about my personal background with M.I. Hummel figurines, but for a little bit of background, I tell you that I grew up on a family farm in northern Indiana, just south of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and graduated from college with a bachelor's degree in speech communications in Manchester University up in North Manchester, Indiana. After graduating from college, instead of using my teaching degree and going into secondary education right away out of college, I opted to go into business with my then father-in-law, Robert L. Miller of Eaton, Ohio. He, over time and in my days working with him in business, he became the world's leading authority on M.I. Hummel art and M.I. Hummel figurines. People came from all over the world to attend M.I. Hummel festivals that we started having in the late 1970s. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But I also worked with my father-in-law on developing the handy guide to M.I. Hummel, and I'll hold this up. We will have this available for you to reference as a part of today's presentation. But this guide is a handy guide to looking at the trademark symbols on the Goebel figurines to allow you to be able to date the Hummel figurines. My journey into the world of M.I. Hummel figurines and collectibles really was a joyful experience in my lifetime. I never, in all my early years, thought that I would end up doing so much in depth with a single artist's work. My father-in-law became his collector mind caused him to start logging and making detailed notes about the various figurines, Hummel figurines, that he was adding to his collection. And people began to say, how do I tell the age of the figurine? And they were asking him a lot of questions because he became known as one of the most elite M.I. Hummel figurine collectors of the time. And so people kind of encouraged him to write a book. And he thought that was a good idea because as a boy, my father-in-law, Robert L. Miller, had been a stamp collector and a coin collector. And he always had coin collecting guides and stamp collecting guides to give him a reference point as to what was it that he was looking at, what else is out there to collect. And so he thought the same thing would be a good idea with M.I. Hummel figurines. That then gave birth to the first Hummel price guide. This is the, I think, 10th edition of the series, but this is the M.I. Hummel price guide book that I was special consultant on for many years, along with my father-in-law, and helped edit it. And this ended up in its various printings and forms, sold really several million copies worldwide. After a few years in Ohio and getting started in the world of collectibles, I was asked by Collector's Mart magazine to write a column for Collector's Mart magazine based out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. And the title of my column monthly for that publication was Figurine Finesse. And many of you that are friends of mine and know me, you'll know my email address is figfinesse@me.com. So that email address that is now figfinesse stands for, in actuality, the title of my column that I wrote for over 25 years called Figurine Finesse. From that column, then I began to get some national recognition and following, and the publishers of another Hummel price guide, when the author died, asked me to update and become the new author of Lucky's M.I. Hummel figurines and price guide, and this bears my name and published under my name. And then there's also a Hummel field guide that has my name as author on it as well, that was sold all over the United States and Canada and some foreign countries. Barnes & Noble usually carried this book and the other one in stock at their retail outlets back in the day when we had a lot of bookstores. Around. So I'd like to then start on talking a little bit about Sister M.I. Hummel and how she came into the art world and how she became such a commercial success. So we'll take you through a little bit of her background and her life. And she died very young. We'll talk about that a bit later. Sister Hummel was born in May of 1909 in Massing, Germany, and she was the daughter of a merchant who her father owned a general store in Massing, Germany, where she was born. And her father, Adolf Hummel, had always dreamed that his daughter would become an artist, because he himself was a budding artist as a youth, but got called up to World War I, and his dreams and hopes of being an artist were dashed. So he had vowed that if ever he had a child who showed a natural ability in art, that he would give her or him every opportunity to develop that talent. And such was the case with Berta. It's interesting that the name Hummel in German translates to bumblebee. And Berta Hummel was always described as being as busy as a little bee. She was kind of high energy and always scurrying around and always busy with one thing and another. And so she early on developed that reputation. She, in 1927, then her father provided the means for her to enter. She applied for and won entry into the Academy of Art in Munich, Germany. And that was in 1927. She flourished there. She did well, and in her, what would be the equivalent of her, our senior year at that kind of a school, in her senior year she was awarded the ability to have a one-woman show in Germany. And she was heralded as one of the greatest, brightest upcoming talents in Germany at that time. So there was a family by the name of Nauer in Germany who owned a company called Ars Sacra. That's A-R-S and Sacra, S-A-C-R-A. The Nauer family contracted with her as an artist to start printing greeting cards, postcards, note cards, and little small prints that people could frame and hang on their walls. So with that, it really launched her into becoming commercially known, because shops and businesses around Germany were handling these graphic prints of her artwork. Sister Hummel was fascinated with children, and a lot of her subjects were children. The subject of her work was children in their everyday activities, whether it was playing with a dog or a cat or their family pet, or being out in the garden with the flowers and things around the home. So Sister Hummel was on this burgeoning art career, and her parents, of course, were very proud and excited about her early young success, and had great hopes. Her father especially had great hopes that my child will achieve the success as an artist that I always dreamed of for myself. So during that senior year at the Art Academy in Munich, she met two friends of hers that were pledging to join the convent at Seesen, Germany, and become nuns. And they, with their friendship, convinced her to seek the Lord's will, I guess, in her life, and see if she wanted to join them at the convent of Seesen. So she goes home and announces to her parents that she has made that decision, that she wants to join the convent and become a nun. It was devastating to her father. It was not the news they wanted to hear. And if you know your German history and Catholic religious history, most Catholic families always have hopes that the oldest son will become a priest. And it's not always maybe back in that day, was not always as much of an excitement for a family to have a woman join the convent. But it was especially hard for her dad because he saw his dreams melting away with her entry into the convent at Seesen, Germany. So she goes to the convent and ends up taking her vows. She took her first vows in the convent at Seesen on August 30th of 1934. So she was 25 years old, I guess, at that point. And when she took her first vows. And as fortune would have it, the Mother Superior recognized her gift and her talent as an artist and did something that really had not been done there before and set her up with a studio in the convent so that she could, as a primary part of her ministry, she was going to produce art on site at the convent in her own studio, which was, like I said, unheard of because giving the vow of poverty and chastity, they're to give up all their former life and worldly thoughts and practices. But somehow Mother Superior had a sense that she needed to allow this artistic talent to grow and bud. So Sister Hummel continued to do drawings, and she was so loved by children that she drew and sketched. She was early on, M.I. Hummel was known as a sketch artist. And I should back up here a little bit to talk about her birth name was Berta Hummel, B-E-R-T-A, Berta Hummel. And when she took her vows and became a Catholic sister at the Franciscan order at the Seesen convent in Germany, her religious name that she took was Maria Innocentia Hummel. And that's how you have the M and the I for Innocentia, and then her last name Hummel, Hummel. A lot of people, because of the way the Germans form a script I, they think it's M.J. Hummel, and that's the way it looks when you see it on this handy guide here. If you look at the German, that's the German script for M.I. Hummel here at the top. But it's not M.J. Hummel, it is M.I. Hummel. And as I said, stands for her religious name, Maria Innocentia Hummel. I have a little picture of her here in her habit. So it's right here in the upper left-hand corner there. And then the upper right-hand photo is of her in the courtyard at the convent with the children grouped around her. And I have a fun little story about this photo that you just saw with the children around her in the courtyard. When I formerly lived in Ohio, at Eaton, Ohio, not too far away from me was St. Meinrad, Indiana, and there was a convent there at St. Meinrad and an abbey there. And I became acquainted with a book that had been published many years prior called Sketch Me Berta Hummel, and it had gone out of print. And I read the book, and to be quite truthful, it was very Sound of Music-like feeling in its read. because Sister Hummel was everything you envision of Julie Andrews with The Hills Are Alive, with The Sound of Music, and you could just see Berta Hummel racing around the hills in Germany saying The Hills Are Alive with artwork and sketches. And so I became intrigued with how that story got published and how it got written. And the story is that a Franciscan sister at St. Meinrad somehow became a pen pal with Sister Hummel over in Germany. And so for years they corresponded back and forth, almost in diary fashion to one another. And so there was a lot of kind of personal, intimate thoughts and feelings in the book. And I thought, oh, how great it would be if we could republish that. So I went to the convent in St. Meinrad, Indiana, and met with Mother Superior there and asked if it would be possible for me and my father-in-law to reprint this book that had gone out of print. And they gave us permission to do that, and we produced, I think, 10,000 copies initially, and sold for $15 a copy, I believe. And so it was called Sketch Me Berta Hummel. And the title of that book comes from the scene you just saw in that photo with the children hovered around her in the courtyard at the convent, because children knew that she loved to sketch children. And so they would run up to her and they would tug on her habit and they'd go, "Sketch me, Berta Hummel, sketch me." And so I've always loved that title of that book, because it just brings that image of her interactions with children, which ended up being the focal point of her career and what took her to world-renowned success ultimately. So I want to discuss now have a discussion, even though you're not here in person, but get your brain going with me, and let's have a discussion, even though we're communicating electronically, about what is artistic success. I've struggled with that all my life, because it seems to be there are a lot of different camps and ideas in the art realm and the art worlds of what does a successful artist look like? Who determines whether or not an artist is going to be successful? In preparation for meeting with you today in this format, I pondered this question, and one of the things I think we have to ask ourselves, is it the monetary factor during the artist's lifetime, or is it praise from the critics that makes for success of an artist's career? I had an original M.I. Hummel work of art that I took to Sotheby's in New York in the 1980s and asked them if they would put it up for public auction. Because to collectors, a couple originals that I had gotten my hands on and put in my international Hummel auctions that I produced, I sold one of her paintings for $25,000. And I thought that was, back in the 1980s, getting in a price range that should have made Sotheby's and those art houses want to take notice. I walked in, and their people looked at it and they scoffed at it and said, "This is not real art." And I go, "Well, it was really done by an artist." And they go, "Well, but it's not important fine art." And it was a very snooty art critic kind of attitude about the piece. And I did go on to sell the piece for $22,000 at one of my subsequent auctions. But I had I had this desire to see what Sotheby's would do with an M.I. Hummel work. So I did a little research, and I was thinking about you and I when we're docents here doing a docent-led tour at the MacNider, how we go into the first room and we talk about the folk art and how the folk artists traveled around the country and that they painted barns by day, and then they would do portraiture in the evening. And the whole thing of how they did those two things concurrently to put food on the table and to keep from starving as artists. So, here they were, maybe a common labor barn painter by day, but doing this wonderful portraiture by night. So it's interesting to me to think about, many artists struggle, and we know the term starving artists and all, but a lot of artists in their lifetime really struggle to put food on the table and clothes on their back. So there's always been this struggle of what makes an artist a commercial success. Going back to Sister M.I. Hummel, she had early success right out of art school because she got a contract for her prints to be made of her artwork in the form of postcards, greeting cards, and wall art that could be framed and hung on the wall. Then in 1934, for her, Sister M.I. Hummel, her greeting cards were seen in shops by a man named Franz Goebel, who was the owner of the Goebel porcelain factory in Rodenthal, Germany, which is near Coburg, Germany. And his factory was reeling from debt incurred during World War I that they had never recovered from. And by 1934, the worldwide depression that hit in 1929 had caused the factory to about go under. And so they were looking for something new and different that could bring new life to the factory. They mainly were surviving in those days by producing slate boards and marbles in that day. So Franz Goebel loved the artwork that he saw, and he went to the convent and he got permission, a letter of agreement and permission from the Mother Superior at the convent to translate Sister Hummel's artwork into three-dimensional ceramic figurines. So thus began the process of Sister M.I. Hummel's artwork being translated into ceramic art. So the figurines are modeled. There's a clay model made, and it's the whole ceramic process, just like the mud workers have always used down here in the basement of the MacNider Art Museum. So I won't take time to go into that whole thing, but it's the ceramic process, multiple molds for each piece on the pieces that are of a child. Like here's this little girl. I'm going to hold up a picture of a little girl with a frog sitting on a fence with a frog there in front of her. So the head on the little girl is one mold. The frog is another mold. The sculptor makes up the sculpted piece, and then they fire a sample piece, and they then cut it into portions where they make the multiple molds to put the piece together. And then all M.I. Hummel figurines made by the Goebel Porcelain Factory in Germany are all meticulously hand painted. And all through the years, every figurine got approval by the convent. And during the 1970s and 80s, the Hummel figurines became very, very popular. And there were those 2 decades in there where the committee at the convent really could, one of their hardest challenges was trying to figure out how to disperse the piles of money they were receiving. And to their credit, the sisters at the convent in Season did great work in Africa. They sent a lot of money for schools and food to impoverished areas of Africa, and did a lot of really great, wonderful, good things with the royalties that they received from the production of the M.I. Hummel figurines. Sister Hummel, by the way, died early in her life. She was only 37 years old. She died in 1947, I think it was, 1947, of tubercular pneumonia. She died shortly after the war. There was no heat at the convent during the worst of the war years, and it's believed that she developed tubercular pneumonia from those poor conditions during the wartime. So, even within her lifetime, she became a tremendous success, both in 2-dimensional reproductions of her artwork and 3-dimensional reproductions of her artwork. So, as a little query on my own the last several days, I decided to research for you a list of some examples of artists that are really regarded to be great masters or very expensive artists to buy their works today on the art markets, but they died penniless. And you know most of these names. Number 1 is Van Gogh. Van Gogh died penniless. So did Paul Gauguin, Vermeer, Modigliani, Rembrandt, Toulouse-Lautrec, and an artist that we show and focus on here at MacNider, Keith Haring. Keith Haring died impoverished, and it wasn't until after his death that his works became valued and recognized and now sell for quite a bit of money. So we've got that whole group of artists that died penniless, and now their original works of art, original Van Gogh, sells for $28 million at recent auctions. But there are also examples of contemporary artists who even are still living, who are making piles of money. And I've got a list of those too. This is a list of works that were sold between July of 2018 through June 2019, for that 12-month period. Jeff Koons, who was born in 1955, which puts him 5 years younger than me, in that 12-month period, he sold $91 million worth of his artwork. Think of that, $91 million in 1 year. Jean-Michel Basquiat, $46 million in that 12-month period. Jean-Michel Basquiat. Number 3 was Christopher Wohl, also born in 1955, the same year Jeff Koons was born. And his income, or sales, of his artwork for that year, 1918 to June of 2019, $15 million. And then I think of having been in the Hallmark business like I was for many years. I had a chain of Hallmark stores in Ohio. Most of you that know me know that. A little bit about me. I sold in my Hallmark stores all kinds of art reproductive work from artists who had become huge commercial success. Now hold on to your stomachs here. We had the artist of the Precious Moments, and we also had Thomas Kincaid, who I personally never carried much of those in my stores. It was just a personal matter and choice with me. But Thomas Kincaid, has his points of light works on all kinds of glassware, placemats, anything they could plaster a Thomas Kincaid image on, whether it be a quilt, a throw. It happened for quite some time, and so he was a commercial success. So, who can dispute the millions of dollars that Sam Butcher made in his licensing with the UNESCO company and selling the Precious Moments figurines? And in my Hallmark stores, I had Hallmark artists that would appear in my stores, and they did quite well financially because they were creating wonderful Hallmark ornaments for the Hallmark card company. And there are today a lot of still avid Hallmark ornament collectors who really revere those artists because they love the works of art that were translated into memorable Christmas ornaments for them and their families. So there's always been this tension of, back to my original question, what makes a successful artist? Is it them having financial success in their own time? Is it them dying penniless and then their works of art selling today for $28 million at a Sotheby's auction? I think it's a little bit of both in my mind, and I want you to think about that yourselves. And again, I'm wishing you were out here in person looking at me so that we could have hands going up and you able to share with me what you think on that matter and on that score. Because it's all over the board. There are people like Keith Haring that die suddenly and unexpectedly and die penniless because of an early death, but then they get discovered post-mortem and their works get recognized and become quite valuable. Other artists have a lot of money while they're living, and those fall into two different categories. Some become very wealthy as artists, and they do more than put food on the table and clothes on their back. They may become multimillionaires in their lifetime, but are never considered by art critics or the art world as being fine artists. And again, it's like with the same thing, I think, with musicians. A lot of musicians like Beethoven and many didn't become really wealthy in their lifetime, but their art has lived on because it's had a wonderful, respected life for decades and decades beyond their death. And I think the same happens with fine artists. I think some will become extremely wealthy in their lifetime, but 50 years from now, will anybody recognize their name as an artist? So it's a complex thing on how that can and does evolve. And I hope that today you've had a little bit of an education on who Sister M.I. Hummel was and who she became, and how even after her death, the proceeds from her commercial success as an artist helped fund some very good deeds all over the world via the Catholic Church. And dispensing of her royalties that were received on her artwork. So with that, I invite you to contact the MacNider Art Museum, and if you want copies of my handy guide to M.I. Hummel dates on how to date your M.I. Hummel figurines, they'll have that available for you. And there's also copies can be requested of my PowerPoint for the full M.I. Hummel brief history presentation that I normally give when I have maybe a full hour or so to devote to that whole brief history of M.I. Hummel. So thank you for joining the video today, and we hope that you've learned something new. And everybody stay healthy, and we'll get through COVID-19 just like we have a lot of other challenges that we've had through the ages.